You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, and Citizen Detective. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hello, Megan, and hello, listeners. Today's case takes us to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where the campus and surrounding community was rocked by the murder of 19-year-old Faith Hedgepeth in 2012. The case would turn into a long and frustrating process with hundreds of false leads and dead ends. But as we'll see, this story would become a testament to the power of DNA and forensic genealogy. And most importantly, at least for me, and one of the reasons I wanted to cover this case, is that it highlights a topic that we talk a lot about on Women in Crime: the high rate of violence against indigenous women and how often their cases are not investigated. Faith's case is different, as investigators never gave up on her, and her case is an amazing example of what can be accomplished when justice serves indigenous families, which we will definitely discuss more later. But first, let's learn a little bit about the university and why Faith had decided to go there. Founded in 1789, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is America's first public university and the oldest state university in the country. While it started by awarding degrees in the liberal arts, it expanded rapidly throughout the 19th century, adding a law school, a teacher's college, and a medical program. By the 20th century, the university had expanded to include both undergraduate and graduate degrees, as well as an emphasis on research and community service. And it grew exponentially during the 1950s and 60s, with several satellite campuses throughout North Carolina. Today, UNC is an umbrella university with 16 different campuses around the state, all unified under one system. But one of the things that UNC Chapel Hill is most known for is its public service, and one of the ways they do that is through their American Indian Center, as not far from Chapel Hill is the close-knit community of the Halawa-Saponi tribe.
You know, Amy, one of my favorite things about this show, I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's learning about different universities. I guess just because we are affiliated with a few where we teach and where we went to school, I love learning about like what they're known for, what the size of the school is, what the feel is it liberal arts? I think that's so fun for me.
I agree, and it's always good trivia. Remember, I'm telling you, like one day we're going to be like on a TV show or playing a trivia game, and we're going to win a big prize because we know the oldest state university in the country.
That's very true. I don't mean it's fun, like, because the context obviously is something very serious that we're talking about, but I do like the knowledge that comes with learning about different universities and what they're known for.
Agreed. Descended from the larger Siouan tribes of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Halawa-Saponi tribe populated the Piedmont area of Virginia and the Carolinas during the Revolutionary War period. While they faced persecution, and most of the tribe relocated to Pennsylvania and New York to join the Iroquois tribe for protection after the Revolutionary War, a small contingency remained in the North Carolina area around modern-day Halifax, Warren, Nash, and Franklin counties. During the 1800s, most of the tribe converted to Christianity, specifically Methodist or Baptist, and as much of their reservation land was sold off by the government, the remaining tribal members suffered under the force of Jim Crow laws that disenfranchised them and took away many of their rights. By the 20th century, the tribe endured great difficulty being recognized as American Indian, and due to the segregation laws, they were classified as, quote, colored, and they faced many of the same segregation rules that affected African American citizens. It took until the 1950s for the tribe to reorganize and create a definitive community which assisted them in their decades-long fight to be a recognized American Indian tribe. And though they have still not been recognized by the federal government, the state of North Carolina gave them formal recognition in 1965. So currently, they are a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to protect the interests, identity, and the rights of the Halawa-Saponi Indian people and to promote their cultural and traditional heritage. Today, they remain a close-knit community of about 4,000 people, the majority of which live in the Halifax area, which is just outside of Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And it was into this community that Faith Hedgepeth was born.
Okay. Good background. See, I didn't know. I mean, I really don't know much about the background here of different tribes. And so that was super interesting as well.
The youngest of 4 children, Faith got her name as her mother felt that she needed faith in order to welcome a 4th child on top of the 2 sons and daughter that she already had. And this was along with a husband who struggled with drug addiction.
I love the name for that reason.
I know, me too.
So interesting.
Yes. When Faith was about a year old, her parents divorced, and she was predominantly raised by her mother, though she allegedly remained close with both of her parents in her tight Halawa-Saponi community. Her family was very active in their local Baptist church, and Faith spent the majority of her middle and high school years participating in various activities there. And this would include youth choir, praise team, and a program called ACT Teens. She was also an exemplary student, and her family described her as someone who always strove for excellence. By her high school graduation, Faith was a member of the National Honor Society, had completed work with Project SEED, which was a project through Duke University. She attended several summer programs at UNC Chapel Hill. She was a member of the Native American Student Association and somehow found the time to also be on the high school cheerleading squad, and she participated in many other extracurricular clubs.
Wow, she's like a real achiever.
Yeah, she is. While doing all of this, her grades were also so good that she received the prestigious Gates Millennium Scholarship for a full ride to the university of her choice.
Wow, a university of your choice.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think I've actually heard that before with the scholarship.
No, usually it's one particular university.
Yeah.
And maybe it was like a state university. It's possible that it wasn't just any university.
Yeah, but still, that's great.
Yeah, that is really cool. And from the summers that she had spent at UNC Chapel Hill, Faith really loved it there, and she decided that that would be her school. And as such, she enrolled as a biology major in the fall of 2010. And not surprisingly, Faith had big goals. She wanted to become a pediatrician and open a practice to serve her tribe. And upon graduation, she would be the first person in her family to obtain a college degree. And this was something she was extremely proud of.
Oh.
However, by her sophomore year, Faith was struggling a bit academically. The amount of biology courses that she had signed up for became just too much for her, and she knew that she had to do something if she wanted to keep her grades up. So she decided to drop a few classes to lighten her load, or at least she thought she had dropped a few classes. Unfortunately, it turned out that the classes were never officially dropped, and Faith had received failing grades for several courses. And this would result in her losing her scholarship and becoming behind in her degree process. I mean, as advisors at the college level, we've seen this happen before.
I was just going to say that this rings so true. Where students come in, I thought I dropped it. I mean, there's usually like a kind of a 2-step process you have to go through to drop a course. It's not just, you know, like one email. Oh, that
Yes.
sucks because it's like a technicality.
Yes, and as we've seen with students, and as I'm sure most of our listeners can imagine, she was absolutely devastated when she realized this issue. So she ended up having to take the spring 2012 semester off just to appeal her grades and try to get her scholarship reinstated. And at this point, her parents were trying to encourage her to just come home and to try something else. But Faith was determined to get her diploma. During this time, she was staying in the city of Chapel Hill, crashing on the couch in her best friend Karina Rosario's 1-bedroom apartment. And while here, she worked as a waitress and she sorted out her grades with the university. And the good news is that it all worked out. And we see that also in our university. Once you sit down with the right people and explain the issue, usually the university will reinstate the individual's enrollment.
Yeah, more often than not, that happens. It just takes a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm. So the university granted her appeal, and she changed her major to education and began pursuing a teaching degree to become an elementary school teacher.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
So in early September of 2012, Faith was patiently waiting for her financial aid check to kick back in from her scholarship so that she could get her own off-campus apartment. But her life would be cut short just as the fall semester was beginning.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
On the evening of September 6th, Faith was on campus and getting back into the college groove after her semester away. She had attended a rush event for the historically Native American sorority Alpha Pi Omega, and this was a sorority that she really wanted to get into. She even called her dad after the event to tell him how much she loved it and hoped that she would get picked. Following the rush, she left with her best friend Karina to head to the campus library to work on a paper about her tribe's history for one of her classes. The two girls studied together for a few hours before going back to Karina's apartment, where they got ready to go out for a night of dancing at a local club called The Thrill. What a name. It's funny when I hear this, it's like, they went to the library to do work, then they went back to the apartment to get ready to go out, and I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It's incredible what we could do when we were young, but now it's like, oh my gosh, I just want my pajamas.
Yeah, and the women danced at the club for about 2 hours before Karina told Faith that she wasn't feeling well and she wanted to leave. Now, security footage would later show that they left the club around 2 a.m., and according to Karina, they went back to her apartment where Faith went straight to sleep. Around 4 a.m., Karina was feeling better, so she called a male friend asking if he wanted to hang out. Not wanting to wake up Faith to tell her she was going out, Karina quietly left the apartment with her male friend around 4:30 a.m. and spent the rest of the night/morning at his apartment. Around 10:30 a.m. the next morning, Karina tried to call Faith to ask for a ride home, but Faith was not picking up her phone, which she thought was pretty odd. At this point, Karina called another friend named Marisol to drive to her home, but when the two returned to Karina's apartment, they found a horrific scene. Faith was leaning up against the bed with the blanket half wrapped around her. Her shirt had been pulled up over her head, and she was naked from the waist down. There was blood all over the bed as well as sprayed up the wall. Karina immediately dialed 911, but when the operator asked her to touch Faith's hand to see if it felt warm or cold, Karina sobbed that it was cold. Her friend Faith Hedgepeth was dead.
Amy, I hear about these cases, and I can't imagine. Like, you leave and you come back, and someone, your best friend is not just dead, but, murdered in your apartment, and there's blood everywhere. I think about the trauma that someone walking into that for the rest of their life really they have to feel. She just kind of snuck out of the apartment. I assume when she left the apartment, she had to go past Faith, right? So, because Faith was crashing on her couch, so everything's fine. Yep. And you come back
a couple of hours
to
later.
This kind of scene. Yeah. Like nothing, there's no expectation or nothing can ever prepare anyone for something like that. And what they deal with after, we never really say that, but what they have to deal with for the rest of their lives is really, really, difficult and traumatic.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you ever come back from that.
Right.
So investigators arrived soon after, and they took stock of the evidence around Faith. And they were, of course, looking for clues as to who could have murdered this bright young woman. In the bedroom, they uncovered an empty glass rum bottle that was covered in blood, and they suspected that this was the murder weapon. They also found a strange white paper takeout bag that had 3 lines of shaking writing. When I say shaking writing, that's just what it says. I'm assuming it just means like it looked like someone's hand was unsteady.
Oh, okay.
It said, the first line stated, quote, "I'm not stupid." The next was, quote, "bitch." And the third was, quote, "jealous." Now, the bag had no blood on it despite being directly next to Faith's body. So this suggested that the bag had been placed there after Faith had already been killed. CSI.
That's really odd. That must have been really puzzling.
CSI also took 52 samples of potential DNA from around the apartment, and this would include a semen sample on the comforter that Faith was wrapped in, a sexual assault kit, and a bloody handprint that was recovered from the rum bottle. Karina was also immediately taken in for an interview to see if she could point to any potential suspects. And Karina did have one. Her live-in ex-boyfriend, Eric Takoy Jones. She explained that their relationship had turned violent, and after several months of enduring this horrible behavior, Karina broke up with him and he had moved out. However, in July of 2012, after Faith began living with Karina, Eric tried to break into the apartment twice. And this was even after Karina changed the locks. So the two women were pretty terrified of what he might do next.
Oh, God.
After the second attempted break-in, Faith drove Karina to the courthouse and sat with her to help her take out a restraining order against Eric to keep him away from the apartment. And according to Karina, Eric heavily resented Faith for this, and he allegedly called Faith threatening to kill her if she got in the way of him getting back together with Karina. So this kind of sounds like an excellent lead, right?
Oh, it sounds like a very good lead.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Eric's DNA was not a match for any of the samples that were found at the scene.
Sorry, Amy, did you say this already, but was Faith sexually assaulted?
Yes, she was.
Oh, okay. I don't know how I missed that detail, but okay.
Because I didn't explicitly say it, but I did say that they found a semen sample on the comforter, and they also did a sexual assault kit. So
No, yeah.
yeah,
I
okay.
somehow missed that. Okay, so he's eliminated. Got it.
So he's eliminated. Police then turned to Faith's autopsy, which detailed her cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. She had also been raped and had lacerations to her face and body, as well as blood under her fingernails, which would suggest a struggle with her attacker. The interesting thing is that the door to the apartment had not been broken into, so it was assumed that whoever had assaulted and killed Faith was somebody that she had likely known. Although I think it's also possible that maybe the door was left unlocked. I'm not sure.
I was just going to say that we always make that assumption, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not, making that assumption is sometimes a hindrance to an investigation. So,
And I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I wasn't smart about locking my doors. And neither, like, I lived in a house with like 8 other girls, and I remember leaving the door unlocked all of the time.
that's funny. No, I lived with 2 girls and the 3 of us were like on it. We always lock the doors.
No. No.
I know. Well,
No, that's good. But regardless, that's, I hope they're not narrowing in too much and ignoring other things, given
Right.
this piece of potential evidence. But anyway, investigators had gone back to the drawing board, and they started going through Faith's phone to see if she had any male friends who were close to her. But they only came up with one potential young man named Brandon Edwards. Now, he was one of Karina's ex-boyfriends. The night of the murder, Faith had sent a text to Brandon around 3:40 a.m. saying, "Hey, B, can you come over here, please? Rosario needs you more than you know." Just to remind you, Rosario is Karina's last name.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is interesting because based on what we heard about the night, it didn't sound like there was anything, going on, or maybe Karina wasn't telling the police what was going on in her personal life. I'm not sure.
Huh.
But
All right. That's just something to take note of.
yeah, but this also turns out to not really be too much because when Faith had texted Brandon, he didn't answer her until over an hour later, and all it said was, quote, "Who is this?" So Brandon was interviewed, and he readily gave over his phone and a DNA sample, which also was not a match for anything found at the scene. Phone data also never put him anywhere near Karina's apartment, so he was another dead-ended lead. Over the course of the next several months, investigators combed through all the men who had attended the thrill between the hours that Faith and Karina had been there. They also took DNA samples to see if any of them were a match, but again, nothing. So investigators really had nothing to work with at this point, and the Chapel Hill community was calling out for answers. What I find interesting is that unlike most of the cases that the Chapel Hill police covered, Faith's murder investigation was sealed by a court order pretty quickly after the investigation began, and this would mean that nothing was being told to the media or to her family. Although I do want to say that they did tell her family about the autopsy and the cause of death.
Okay. We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors.
Now, 4 months after her murder, police had not even released a cause of death to the public, and the UNC student newspaper petitioned the judge to release the information about the case so that they could find out what happened to their fellow student. But the judge declined the petition, and over the next 2 years, her case would be resealed every 45 days.
Why? Do we ever learn why?
No, it's still unclear why they wanted to keep the case so under wraps. But at the same time, it's not uncommon for investigations to remain quiet while they are active and open. But it seems to me like in a case like this, getting information from the public could have been helpful.
I mean, they like to keep details under wraps, but it seems like the effort and resealing it every 45 days seems like they're really trying to keep some detail. But you know what? This kind of, I think about like the Delphi case. They wouldn't release any details, even the way the girls were murdered, because they want the true perpetrator only to be the person who knows the details. So
Yes.
that could be it, and they could be very serious about that.
And we never know what's going on behind, closed doors of the investigation. So who are we to judge?
Sure.
Finally, in January of 2013, the police held a press conference in which the public was informed that they were working with FBI profilers. And then in September of 2013, it was released that the Chapel Hill police had called in the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation for assistance. But other than that, no details were given about what was going on. And by the end of 2013, though investigators assured the university and the community that Faith's case was still open and active, there was no new information. The seals were greatly contested by the Chapel Hill community, with several media outlets coming together to protest the seals and open the investigation so that the public knew what was going on. And I can understand this. If I was living on that campus, I would be anxious to know what is going on in a murder investigation that happened to a fellow student.
Absolutely.
Yes. And while the seals weren't completely removed after, all this pressure, a court hearing allowed the immediate investigation of the crime to go public. So this would be the part about the bottle found at the scene, the DNA profile, and also some of the items that was found in the room. But again, not much was given. That was really it.
Okay.
The media outcry continued over the lack of information, and eventually it seemed to sway the courts, and the seals were completely removed in September of 2014. Now, this is 2 full years after Faith's murder. Now, in this release, the media now had access to the autopsy, the DNA profile created by the FBI, and Karina's 911 phone call from that night. But while the media was finally happy to have something to report on, the released evidence turned Faith's best friend into the community's #1 suspect.
Oh, okay.
And as we mentioned before, this poor woman walked into this scene also. So she's dealing with that trauma. Now she's dealing with the community kind of turning on her.
Why are they turning on her? Why does she become the suspect here? There was semen found at the scene. I mean, are they saying that she, along with this male that she was with, did something?
Yeah, good question. I think it starts because the 911 call. Now, remember I said she was the one who called 911 because she found her friend in her apartment. This call was heavily scrutinized by armchair sleuths and reporters, and they were saying that in the 8-minute phone call, Karina never once said Faith's name. She just referred to her as, quote, my friend. I don't think there's much to that. But likewise, Karina never mentioned that she found Faith with their mutual friend Marisol, which makes it sound like Karina was alone at the apartment. And lastly, sleuths were quick to point out that Karina seemed to refuse to see if Faith was breathing throughout the call, which made many people suspicious of her motive.
Or just the fact that her friend was obviously in a horrible state and she was totally terrified to touch a probably clearly dead body with blood everywhere. I can't stand, I really just hate the overanalysis of 911 calls. It's so inappropriate. It never really tells you anything because it's not real evidence. It's judging people's affect. And I wish that we could kind of leave that behind.
But luckily, Megan, though she was smeared in the press and by many in the community who felt that she was hiding something, police continued to assert that they did not find Karina to be a suspect or an accomplice in Faith's murder. I mean, unfortunately for Karina, this didn't stop the public scrutiny, but at least this didn't turn the investigation in any way.
Good.
The public scrutiny would continue after one of Faith's other friends came forward with a strange voicemail that she received from Faith the night of the murder. Now, she had given police this voicemail at the very beginning of the investigation, and this is when she was initially interviewed. And upon first listen, it just sounded like Faith maybe had butt dialed her friend while she was at the club, since it was just several minutes of static and muffled voices. But by 2014, enough media was involved in keeping the case alive and in the public light that Crime Watch Daily hired an audio expert named Arlo West to enhance the voicemail to see if the voices could be more audible.
Oh, boy.
And he succeeded, at least, I guess, in some people's view. He claimed that in the enhanced audio, you could hear 3 voices, 2 female voices and 1 male voice. He also claimed that you could hear 1 female crying out for help and the other female and male referred to each other as Eric and Rosie. And I just want to point out, Rosie was a known nickname for Karina because, again, her last name was Rosario. Now, Arlo West believed that this call had been accidentally placed while Faith was being murdered. So now it had, people are wondering, could the suspects have been her best friend and her best friend's ex-boyfriend?
This sounds like Amanda Knox to me, just because of the roommate and whatnot on her boyfriend. What time was that call placed at? Do we know?
Well, this becomes the issue because when police were given the enhanced audio, the timestamp on the voicemail was 1:23 a.m. And it was confirmed that Faith and Karina were still at the club at that time. And security footage caught them leaving the club 45 minutes later. And not to mention, they had already cleared Eric as a suspect because his DNA was not a match to anything in the apartment or the semen found in and near Faith's body.
So this is easy to dispel.
Easy. I mean, there was also no real evidence pointing to Karina having a hand in Faith's death at all. There was only armchair speculation. So investigators continued to assert that Karina was not a person of interest.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
Instead, police were focusing on the DNA found throughout the crime scene, and they were working up a genetic family tree to see if they could trace the DNA back to a particular person. And this is a process known as forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG. Now, this process uses DNA along with traditional genealogical tracking databases to find clues in the sources of an unknown DNA. And one of the most famous cases to be solved using FGG was, of course, the Golden State Killer case in 2018.
Yep.
And many others that we have talked about on Women in Crime.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Chapel Hill Police had partnered with a forensic genealogy corporation called Parabon Labs, and by September of 2016, they had been able to create a digital image of what the suspect might look like based on phenotyping in the DNA profile. So cool.
Ooh, yeah, I didn't know that for this case.
The image was released during a special 2020 episode about Faith's case. And now there was an appeal to the public that if they had any tips to please contact Chapel Hill detectives. I'm surprised you haven't seen this episode. I know you've seen every episode of 2020.
I thought so. I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah. Clearly, I'm going to go back and watch it after this, but okay.
And the public obliged, sending in thousands of tips. Likewise, the forensic genealogist was able to reverse engineer a family tree on the suspect's DNA. This would lead police to distant relatives who would readily give up their DNA to see if it would help crack the case. And it did. As in...
Oh, I was gonna...
Sorry, I kept you hanging
I was
there.
sitting here, I held my breath. I was like, okay.
In 2021, all the DNA testing came down to one perfect match. A 28-year-old man named Miguel Enrique Salguero Olivares. The match was confirmed after Miguel was stopped on a DWI near Raleigh, North Carolina in August of 2021. He was then arrested for the DWI after failing to appear in court, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. As is protocol in North Carolina, anyone who is arrested has their DNA taken and put into a forensic database to see if they match any pending cases. And Miguel was a positive hit for the same DNA that was found in the Faith Hedgepeth murder. So basically, the genealogy led them to the potential that Miguel was their suspect, but then the DNA taken from his DWI arrest was all the confirmation they needed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we see, in my classes, I talk a lot about whether it's fair or whether it's good policy to have DNA taken upon arrest, because many say that it's a violation of privacy. But in this case, it led to a violent suspect, and it got a violent person off of the street. So
I know.
It's a really tough one.
It's a very hard one for me as well when people ask my opinion on it. I truly have mixed feelings about it. But exactly in this case, you go, oh, I'm so glad this exists.
I know.
Like, wow.
And it happens often.
Often enough.
Yes. And then on the other side, though, if people are innocent until proven guilty, then is it right to take their DNA at arrest? We'll save this for another time, Megan.
I know. This is a much longer discussion.
Yes. Investigators announced the arrest to the press on September 15th of 2021. And this is where Attorney General Josh Stein cited, quote, "Sometimes justice is swift, other times it takes longer. Today, after 9 years and a week, an arrest has been made in the murder of Faith Hedgepeth. Today's important announcement proves the power of partnership, persistence, and the potency of DNA. Police detectives and SBI agents conducted thousands of interviews and spent countless hours in this case, never giving up and always fighting for Faith and her family."
I mean, I have to agree with all that, but I'm going to ask right now, I think this is going to be a person who was unknown to Faith. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that still remains to be seen, or at least it has not yet been released to the public.
Okay.
Now, very little is known about Miguel, aside from the fact that he emigrated to the U.S. from Guatemala in 2010, which would be about 2 years before Faith was murdered.
Okay.
Now, he would have been 19 at the time of the murder, And he also lived in the Chapel Hill apartment complex where Faith was staying with her friend Karina.
Mm-hmm.
There's some evidence that the two were at a block party at the same, remember I said they were at the same apartment complex? There had been a block party and Faith and Karina were there and Miguel was there as well. However, it's unclear if the women ever met him that night or if they just both happened to be there. Now, at the time of his arrest, Miguel was living with his mother in Durham, which was a small town right outside Chapel Hill, and he was working as a house painter. So anything else about his involvement with Faith or potential motives for her murder have not yet been publicly released as of the recording of this episode.
When I said unknown, I also mean someone, remember when they talked about it must have been the door was unlocked,
Yes.
someone she let in. I don't believe that was the case. I don't believe she let someone in. So I'm going to say that she did not let him in. And even if she met him briefly in passing, this wasn't a known acquaintance in terms of her letting them in, there being a relationship.
That's
And
correct.
I think the motive is clearly a sexual assault.
It's still possible she let him in for whatever reason, but yes, I agree. And
It's
I mean,
possible, but I don't think so.
yeah, I don't either. As of the recording of this podcast, a trial date has not been set as the amount of evidence taken from Miguel's home via a search warrant in 2021 is still being processed. And a lot of it is digital and forensic, so it will take a lot of time.
And it could be that there's a lot more revealed. The reason I say too, I think that the information, if they knew each other, if there was some type of relationship, I feel like that would have come to light already.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Investigators have also mentioned that there will be continued extensive forensic requests to confirm much of the data that they had found over the last decade. There are also 9 years of case files for both the prosecution and the public defender's office to go through. So it's unclear when we can anticipate this case actually going to trial, but of course we will be keeping an eye on it. As for Faith's family, was an arrest enough for them to have closure? Well, her father expressed that while they feel that there has been justice, it's not yet closure. So though they're extremely happy that an arrest was finally made in the case, the potential for the trial is what brings the family hope.
Yeah.
Her father told the press, quote, "We just take it a day at a time. It's never very far from our minds, but we cannot dwell on it every day." And while they wait for closure, the family has not been idle. They've created Faith Smile, the Faith Hedgepeth Memorial Scholarship, which awards 2 annual scholarships to a female high school student who is either a member of or has ancestry in a recognized North Carolina American Indian tribe and will enroll at a 4-year institution.
Wonderful.
So similar to the scholarship that was given to her.
Yes.
UNC Chapel Hill also remembers Faith. In 2013, on the anniversary of her murder, over 150 students walked the campus in a silent vigil held by the Alpha Pi Omega sorority. Remember, that was the sorority that she so desperately wanted to become part of.
I do.
Her family joined many of her friends and fellow students as they walked the perimeter of the campus holding carnations and poster boards calling for justice for Faith. The campus also holds a vigil for Faith every year in the hopes to keep her case alive. They also created an award, which is a scholarship for sophomore students. Now, this is for students who are looking to use their academic career in a matter of service towards North Carolina indigenous communities. And this award will specifically go towards research materials and other supplies that the students would need to be successful. So while UNC Chapel Hill and the Hedgepeth family continue to wait for closure, they're clearly still moving forward with honoring her memory in various ways.
That's great.
I want to pivot here and talk a little bit about the nature of violence against indigenous women. Now, in Faith's case, investigators were actively pursuing it for over a decade, and eventually they got answers. But unfortunately, this is a very rare occurrence for indigenous women. For starters, indigenous women will face violence at a rate of 10 times higher than the national average. And they are also twice as likely than non-indigenous women to experience sexual assault.
Yeah, the numbers are just really alarming when it comes to this population of women.
Yeah, and we've covered other stories that cite some of this information, but I just want to also point out that a report by the U.S. Interior cited that there are currently over 4,200 missing and murdered indigenous cases that have not been solved.
Right.
We've talked about some of these issues, such as jurisdictional issues between the reservation police forces, which, by the way, are understaffed and ill-equipped, the relationship between them and federal investigations, right? So these investigations or lack thereof. It's because everyone's stretched thin and there's so much of a disconnect.
It's also, there is a jurisdictional thing, like reservation police can deal with certain crimes, but not others. They can deal with certain offenders who are local, but they're not allowed to pursue other offenders who might not be part of the tribe. There are very nuanced complications here.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think it's very possible that the reason why Faith's case ended up being solved is because she was not from a federally recognized tribe. And the reason why that's important is because that means there was no tribal police jurisdiction to deal with.
Yes.
Her case was, as far as we know, treated like any other homicide that might have hit the Chapel Hill area. It was investigated by the local jurisdiction, and they were able to bring in the help of outside agencies for funding and other resources as needed.
Yeah. That is the unfortunate part here. I mean, fortunate, but unfortunate. You know, the contradiction here is the reason why her case was solved. I agree.
And also, we have to acknowledge that she was not murdered or missing on a reservation. If she had been, figuring out who would take the case and follow up on it would have been much more complicated.
Right.
And usually the reason we see Indigenous women's cases going unsolved is a lack of media attention, which was really the opposite of what was going on in Faith's case.
Yeah.
In a way, her case being sealed created a larger media storm as the press angled to get information that they weren't allowed to see. So while this kept her story from the public eye, it put pressure on investigators, and that made it into the media.
Yeah, that's interesting. The demand was more.
Yeah, and I think in Faith's case, this was very helpful because we saw that the pressure put on the court led to the unsealing of the documents. I mean, we've seen cases where this could work in the opposite way, right? Sometimes it could backfire and somebody could be wrongly arrested.
Yes.
We also can't ignore the potential bias in that many Indigenous women whose cases go unsolved are impoverished and living outside socially standard lifestyles. And as we saw with Faith, she was a very accomplished young woman who was going to college on a scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
But despite the fact that Faith's case had the odds in her favor, it is refreshing to see that solving Indigenous cases is possible with the right resources. If our listeners would like to know more about the reality facing Indigenous women and how they could help, we invite you to check out nativehope.org and Missing Murdered Indigenous Women of the USA at MMIWUSA.org. For more information on the Halawa Saponi tribe, please check out their nonprofit at HALIWA-SIPONI.org. Lastly, if you would like to support UNC's American Indian Center, which funds a scholarship in Faith's name, you can check them out at americanindiancenter.unc.org. We hope by telling Faith's story today that we can help spread the word about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we really look forward to covering more cases that are solved like Faith's. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Campus Killings.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Megan Sachs and Dr. Amy Schlossberg, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/Campus Killings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.